For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
Hello and welcome to StratNewsGlobal. I am Surya Gangadharan. India and Nepal appear to have struck all the right notes during Prime Minister Sher Bahadur Deuba's 3-day visit. Today was the second day, and most of the official engagements actually ended today. Some of the key highlights that came out of this meeting. And India financed and built rail link connecting Jayanagar in Bihar to Kurta in Nepal, 35 kilometers away. 132 kilovolt power transmission line in Nepal, obviously built by India using a grant or maybe partly a loan. The RuPay card has been launched in Nepal, so those of you with RuPay cards can use that freely in Nepal. And construction of 132 India-financed health centers to be completed by December next year. So this work is well underway. I'd just like to introduce my guest now, Ambassador Ranjit Rae. You have seen him on our channel before. He's the former Indian ambassador to Nepal. And so welcome, glad to have you.
Thank you.
So would you say Prime Minister Deuba's visit goes some way towards mitigating KP Oli's assaults on the India relationship?
You know, India has to work with whichever government is in power. And I think every visit of a Nepalese Prime Minister to India is extremely important. Why this visit is so important is, A, it's taking place after several years, partly because of the COVID pandemic. There was not too much high-level personal political interaction. And Nepal has undergone a lot of political turmoil in the last 2 years or so. And this visit, for one, seems to be based, on the economic engagement, on the development partnership between the two countries. And I think this is the big, significant result of the visit.
Mm-hmm. So how would you describe Prime Minister Deuba's position? He is dependent on other parties for support. There are elections later this year. Is he somebody who's going to last? Can we see him going beyond the current election?
Well, I mean, that's $1 million question. I don't think anyone can answer that. But I do remember when he took over some 7 or 8 months ago, there were a lot of questions about the longevity of his tenure, whether, he will survive, whether there'll be midterm polls. And you can see that he's a very shrewd politician and he's kept his coalition together. And my own sense is that this coalition will, stay intact, at least in the foreseeable future. What happens in the next elections is very difficult to forecast. But I think the principal contest will be between Deubas Nepali Congress and KP Oli's UML party.
Mm-hmm. And would you say he's been able to keep his end up so far? I mean, any murmurs that you see there, any disturbances that you see?
Well, so far the coalition has kept intact. But I think the big question now is, what do the smaller members of the coalition, especially Prachanda's Maoists and, the breakaway faction from the UML led by Madhav Nepal, what these two parties do? Because, one thing I'm clear about is that these two parties cannot really fight elections on their own. That kind of grassroots level support, they don't have the resources required to fight the election. So they have to fight an election in coalition with somebody. And, it will either be the Nepali Congress or it could even be KP Oli's UML. They might even go back to the UML. So it remains to be seen how things, develop in the next couple of months.
Mm-hmm. So did you find Mr. Deuba's visit to the BJP headquarters, I found it interesting. I mean, what message does that send?
Well, it's certainly unusual because, he's a sitting prime minister, but at the same time, he's also the head of the ruling party. And I think Nepal is very keen to establish very good relationships with the Indian ruling party. And, BJP has uncontested hold over Indian politics, as the recent state level elections demonstrate. And I think the Nepali Congress has been very keen to step up its partnership, its relationship with the BJP. And the Prime Minister's wife, Mrs. Arzu Deuba, who's a politician in her own right, has played a pretty important role in this regard. So while some eyebrows might be raised, I think it's important that this relationship, between the two ruling parties develops. This is not to exclude, the Nepali Congress developing a relationship with other political parties in India.
Yeah. Yeah. But if you look back, sir, the Nepali Congress had the close ties with the Indian National Congress, and there may have been a break in between because there was a lot of comment and criticism that current leadership in India, political leaders in India, don't appear to have the same rapport with their Nepali counterparts.
Well, what you're saying is right, and these ties were really in the context of the freedom movement in India. Many Nepali politicians participated in our freedom movement. They were inspired by the freedom movement. They fought for multi-party democracy in their own society. So these ties go back a long time. And then don't forget that the Indian Congress ruled in India for many, many decades. So it was natural for the ruling party in Nepal, or the Nepali Congress, to have close ties with the Indian National Congress. The political scene in India today is very different. So clearly, it's important for the parties in Nepal to reach out to the dominant parties in India. So I think this is a natural evolution. I feel that just as India has to be connected to every political party in Nepal, I think Nepalese political parties must establish good relations with Indian political parties across the board.
Mhm. So, when I look back at a time when any project, any hydroelectric project involving India used to come in for a lot of opposition and criticism from Nepal, that doesn't appear to be the case anymore. It's interesting. How did this happen?
Well, in fact, one of the big takeaways from this visit is, I think, the focus on, this vision on power sector cooperation. I think this is a very major development. And we are not looking at power in a compartmentalized fashion. We are looking at it in a comprehensive, integrated way, from generation, to transmission, to power trade. And I think this is really a win-win situation. Nepal in the past has been complaining that, the power that they are generating faces certain obstacles in accessing the Indian market. And I think this vision now clears a lot of these misconceptions and lays the framework for an integrated sort of energy policy between the two countries. And it's not just between the two countries. The vision statement also takes this to the sub-regional level, to the BBIN level, that is Bhutan, Bangladesh, India, and Nepal, will work together in the power sector. And what this will really create is an integrated power market within our sub-region. It will really bring all the economies together. And I think all our neighbors will benefit from the market access that they get in India, and this will really sort of I think even have positive political spin-offs in the future. So this is a very significant and a very important step. Of course, no new power agreements have been signed, but I think what is important is the reiteration of the commitment to move ahead rapidly with the Pancheshwar 5,000 megawatt hydropower project on the Mahakali. And the Mahakali River has also, in recent years, or in the last 2 years, there's been certain border disputes which is somehow or the other are related to the Mahakali. So I think using this river really to promote bilateral cooperation between the two countries should have political spin-offs on other problem areas.
Mhm. You mentioned the border, sir. I recall that Deuba made a reference to the border issue during his remarks to the press, at the briefing with the PM. Do you see this issue? I presume he's referring to Kalapani. Do you see this as emerging as another big, obstacle going forward?
Well, this is an issue, but I think, India is pretty confident about its stand on this issue. The problem for us is that the Nepalese parliament has basically ratified by two-thirds majority the new map of Nepal.
Yeah.
And the problem we face is that, what is the mandate of any Nepali negotiating team with India? I mean, if will they be in a position to accept a map which is different from what has been mandated by their parliament? But
Yeah.
I heard our foreign secretary's briefing to the press, and what he said is we are two very friendly countries, two friendly neighbors, and sensitive issues like the border should not be politicized, and that the only way really to resolve these issues is through dialogue and discussion. And I think that's a very fair position, that eventually this matter has to be resolved by talking to each other.
Would you say that the ratification of that $500 million compact, Millennium Compact, by the Nepali Parliament, would you say that marks a major move forward? I mean, not just in
Well,
terms
it's
of,
interesting. Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned this. This is a $500 million grant by the US, and there
yeah,
was a huge debate in Nepal, and the Communist parties of Nepal were very reluctant to endorse this on the grounds that this was anti-China in some way. It was part of the Indo-Pacific Treaty, and I think the Chinese had also been working actively to prevent the ratification of this compact. And despite this, the Nepalese parliament has gone ahead and ratified it. And, this compact, I think from India's perspective, is also a good development, because a major element of the compact is to develop transmission lines, which will which will export Nepalese power to India. So, in a small way, we saw the US-China contestation for influence playing out in Nepal. And for the present moment, at least, the Chinese seem to be a little bit on the back foot. And perhaps that's one reason why Wang Yi, the state councillor and foreign minister of China, paid this recent visit to Nepal.
but the Chinese are not going to go away. I mean, they're going to be there. They're going to compete. So I presume we'll be tested going forward.
Absolutely. I mean, the Chinese are long-term players. They're not going to go away. And, one or two setbacks doesn't mean that they, change their objectives or approach in Nepal. So, they are very much there to stay. And this is something that Indian policymakers, will have to deal with.
So, how would you see the Deuba prime ministership as something that's good for us? I mean, compared to what we've seen.
That's a very value loaded question. See, we can't really choose who we work with in Nepal. Nepal is very important for India from every perspective, and we have to deal with whichever government in power, irrespective of whether we like the leader or not. So fundamentally, we have to work and develop close relations with every government in power. And I think for every Nepalese government, it's very important to have good relations with India. Having said that, historically, I think India, has had good relations with Nepali Congress leaders. We've also had good relations with many of the UML leaders. I dare say even with some of the Maoist leaders. I agree that during Oli's time, I think our relations were really swinging like a pendulum, and that's really not a nice. That's something that's avoidable. And I do hope that our relations will be more stable on an even keel and with less theatrics.
Although I can see that even towards the end of his tenure, Oli did try to reach out and try and stabilize things. He did make that effort.
Well, he certainly did. And I think we reciprocated equally. We had a series of high level visitors from India to the Oli government. There were also visitors from the BJP to Oli. So, yes, things did improve. But don't forget that the whole boundary issue really was precipitated during Prime Minister Oli's time. And I'm not, it doesn't really matter as to what prodded him or who was behind it and so on. But the fact of the matter remains, he was prime minister when he precipitated this issue, and this has really become a major irritant in the relationship. And now, every time a Nepalese prime minister meets an Indian counterpart, the first question that the Nepalese street asks is, "What did you do on the boundary?"
Yeah.
Oli has promised that he's going to get all these territories back. So this has become a huge political issue in Nepal. In the past, it used to be the 1950 treaty. Now it's, the boundary plus the 1950s treaty. And I think our relationship can do without some of these, issues.
Well, since you mentioned it, the 1950 treaty, where are we going with it? I mean, is it, there were some discussions planned, I think.
This is one of those perennial issues. And I think we are quite prepared to discuss it and see how best it can be amended. But what is important is that treaties between two countries, two sovereign countries, and the interests of both sides have to be accommodated. Because if the interest of one country is not accommodated, then there is no need for a treaty. So I think that has to be the basic premise on which the two countries have to work. So both sides have to be agreeable to accept the concerns of the other side. That's the only way forward, and obviously through negotiation and dialogue.
I mean, one gets the impression this is more of leverage that the Kathmandu elite uses against India whenever they want something else or to balance off,
Well, I won't deny the fact that it's good to have something to sort of to create these irritants from time to time and to leverage them, as you say. But I think it's in our interest that we don't allow these issues to become cankerous sores in the relationship. And perhaps we need to seriously sit and try and resolve them. Of course, in the past, when we said we are willing to discuss and negotiate, then we find that the Nepalese side doesn't really reciprocate. And so we have this nagging suspicion that, they want to keep some of these irritants in the relationship alive to be used from time to time for, domestic political purposes. But I think, both sides should really sit and resolve some of these issues.
So, last question. The enormous appeal that an anti-India agenda has in the streets, and the fact that the communist parties constantly are able to build on this. You see this as a major obstacle? I mean, this is something they're able to drum up at seemingly at will.
So there are several reasons. I mean, there is a structural asymmetry in the relationship. If you're sitting in Nepal, you look south, you look east, you look west, you find India. And you find an India which is really huge compared to Nepal. So, that is the psychology of the relationship. Secondly, historically, it was the royalists that promoted this anti-India nationalism. And, this was the common point between the royalists and the communists after King Mahendra overthrew multi-party democracy in 1960. In fact, I've explained this in great detail in my book, Kathmandu Dilemma. I mean, here's not the time. So it is the leftist parties in Nepal that have, as I say in the book, that it's really part of their DNA now. That's how they're trained in terms of Bharat Vistarvad. They see Indian expansionism as a major threat to Nepal, and this is the way they've been brought up. This David versus Goliath, this small country, strong leader standing up to big and powerful India, sells well in domestic politics. But I should like to clarify that this feeling is more prevalent in the Kathmandu Valley, and certainly not in the rest of the country. At a people-to-people level, I think we have very close, cordial, friendly, very warm relationship between our two peoples.
So going forward, sir, what do you wish in the relationship? What do you see going forward?
Going forward, I see, as part of our neighborhood first policy, that it is the economic engagement that should be fundamental to the relationship. The cultural, spiritual, roti beti, rishta, all that is there. But we now really need to build on the economic foundations. There's a new generation, an aspirational generation in both countries. And so we should look at our sub-region as an interdependent, interconnected, open economic space where every country, can exploit its full comparative advantage, supply goods and services without let. And I think if we have this kind of interdependent economic region, as I said, there will be very positive spin offs in terms of the political relationships that India has with some of its neighbors.
On that note, sir, great talking to you. Thank you for that perspective, and good night, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Pleasure.
And for all of you who have tuned into this conversation, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Come to us with your questions and observations and comments, and follow us on social media and Twitter, Instagram. Thank you and good night.